When it comes to seeing God's promises fulfilled in our lives, how much of that process is up to Him and how much is up to us? Hey, it's your host, Whitney, and today we're going to dive into this topic and hopefully leave with a little more clarity on what's our responsibility and what's not. So thank you for joining me as we discover the beauty of becoming together. So in the first couple episodes of this season, we talked about really two important milestones that are necessary to pass through in our faith before we can even do justice to a conversation like today's. That first milestone that we talked about is discovering that God does in fact care about the things that we care about, even more so than we do. And He wants to deliver even more than we expected. And this is such an important truth to grab hold of. As songwriter Mia Fields always says, not only can God do it, but He wants to. Isn't that amazing? The second milestone is realizing it's going to take faith to hold on and believe for the promises that God's given us. We'll experience seasons throughout our lives where everything we see around us looks contrary to what God's spoken. And that's the episode where I talked about Brazil and just being in that garbage dump in Jardim Gramajo. And when we look around and everything seems so contrary to what God's spoken, we have to be determined that we're going to believe what God has said, no matter what our situations look like, no matter what our senses are telling us, right? So this leads me to the next important milestone in our faith journey, and something God has really been challenging me in, I would say about the last year or so. And I'm going to be honest, there may be more technical terms for what I'm going to be talking about. I don't know, maybe in the theology world, they have this pegged a little better than I do. Maybe they don't. Maybe I'm just making this up. But I like to refer to what I'm going to be talking about today as this concept of passive faith and active faith. But before we go any further, I do want to make this clarification that neither of these types of the faiths that I'm going to be talking about today are wrong. So normally when I hear the word passive, I automatically attach a negative connotation to it, right? But as I'm talking about it today, I don't want us to see the faith as either like wrong or right. I just want us to simply see them as the different ways that we're interacting with our faith as we grow in spiritual maturity. So kind of picture it, if this helps, more of like a continuum. As we're growing in our relationship with God, our faith should be growing with us as well. So now that the clarification has been said, to help illustrate what I'm talking about when I'm saying active faith and passive faith, I have a story. And I feel like I always have a story. But I really think this is a good one. I mentioned in one of the first episode of the season that there's a really cool God story behind how I got my first apartment. And I realize this is taking quite a few steps back in my journey, since in that episode I was sharing about the testimony of me buying my first home. But I do think that this story, it's one of my favorite God stories so far in my life. It's just a cool one that really illustrates well what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to do a little bit of time travel to late summer / early fall after I graduated college. And I think it's worth noting that my college experience wasn't the typical path that people take. So I went to community college right after high school and graduated with my associates. But right before my last semester of community college is when my dad passed away of cancer. So I ended up taking that last semester off, then finished my degree in the spring, and then took a few years break from college. And I was living with my granny at the time, and I was working well, it felt like a bajillion jobs. I just had a ton of part-time jobs at that time, and was doing music ministry with my sister. But during this season, I just really started to feel like God was leading me, that it was time to get a place of my own. And I was really grateful that my granny opened up her home to me during that whole process of grieving the loss of my dad and her son, and the time of just finishing up my degree, because it was a crazy time of like commuting like an hour away, and like I said, working a million part-time jobs and just normal life stuff and family stuff. And so it was such a busy time that I really couldn't have done it without her support. So I was super grateful for that. But I could really feel that God was beginning to answer that prayer of mine that I had mentioned in episode 1, to have that place of my own. And as I prayed into this, I felt like God said, like as he was leading me, that like this was going to happen fast. So as you can imagine, like no better feeling than when God's like, hey, this new exciting chapter in your life is coming. And guess what? It's going to happen really fast. Because that's like never what he says to me. In my history with him, like could count on one hand barely the times that that's happened, right? Like normally it's like, hey, this thing's going to happen like 10 years down the road. So I was super excited that this was one of those times where I'm like, oh, God's doing this exciting thing and he's telling me it's going to be fast. And was just really had this great anticipation of what God was going to do, because like here he was answering this prayer of mine that I had prayed for years. And I was just really excited for that chapter to unfold. So naturally, the apartment hunt began. And I'm looking up places in town and just kind of, figuring out my budget. What can I afford? Asking friends for recommendations on apartments, and started making some phone calls. And, phone call after phone call, I'm hearing the same response from everyone. And to my great disappointment, everyone was on a giant wait list. I think the minimum was about 3 months. And a lot of them were like 6 months, some were like out a year. And it just felt like someone deflated my balloon. It's like the perfect way. I was like so excited, so pumped up. And then someone just took a little needle and deflated my balloon of excitement. And it was like instantly, I just started questioning, like, man, I thought I heard from the Lord about the move and that it would happen quickly. And just kind of that doubt started coming in, of like, did I hear wrong? Was this something that God was wanting me to do? Or is it something that like I was trying to do and just like expecting God to bless it? And just kind of, I think we've all been in those situations. You just kind of go down the list of like, did I hear God? Did I not hear God? Was it me? Was it him? So I was sharing all of these thoughts and feelings that week with one of my friends, Robin. And she was actually one of my guests on the podcast last season. And I was talking to her about it, and she sympathized with my disappointment, but she didn't seem moved at all by the news, which I'm like, are you hearing me? Like, I thought this was going to happen. God told me this, but then now it's like, it felt like not necessarily a closed door, because I knew it could, in 3 to 6 months, like it could happen. But she wasn't moved, and she was just like, Whitney, we know this is something that God's leading you to do. And although this wasn't the news we were expecting, this does not change what God has said. So pack your first box. Find something you're not going to need over the next couple of months and pack a box as an act of faith. And when she told me that, I was like, okay. Like it kind of like gave me that grounding of, okay, I know I hear from the Lord. Like, I know this is what he's spoken over me. And, what I had just moments ago assumed was a closed door, or at least a delay at best. What I thought was like a no from God. Robin reminded me that when God gives us a promise, he's faithful to make it happen. And she's often quoted her pastor, who says that we're in the request department and it's God who's in the results department. So by the time we finished up our phone conversation, I looked around my room and I'm like, all right, what do I not need that I could pack away? And that turned out to be my art supplies. They were not being put to any kind of use. So I took those. They were in the top shelf of my closet, took them down, packed them in a cardboard box that I had gotten from work and taped it shut. And it sat on the floor next to my closet as that reminder to keep the faith that, if God was leading me to take the step, then he was going to make a way. And he had my yes in this process, right? Because I packed that box. So it was about a week and a half later, I get this phone call from one of the apartment complexes. And it was actually one of my top choices. I think it was like the top 2 choices for the places I had applied to. And the manager called me to let me know she had an opening coming up. And she was like, we have a waiting list, but I just decided to go ahead and move you to the top of the list, which, by the way, like, still not sure why she did that. It had to be a God thing, had to be favor. But it was like, we have this waiting list, but I just felt like I needed to move you to the top. And she let me know that I could move in, I think it was like the following week or 2. And what was really another really cool part of that story is that one of the reasons this was my top places for the my top choices for this complex was it was nice and affordable and like all that stuff. But one of my really good friends, Gabe, lived at the complex as well. And it just so happened that the apartment that was opening up was literally next door to my friend Gabe. Our balconies, so we like shared a wall in the living room. And so our balconies were right next to each other. And like, how perfect. Because I actually had been a little bit nervous about moving out on my own for the first time, especially as a woman and, all the things. But like how amazing that God orchestrated it. Like, out of all the buildings there, the apartment that opened up was the one right next door to my friend. And it just made me feel extra safe. And it was just a really fun season in my life for sure. So I realized in that time, like, what I was told would take months to happen, even up to a year or more, literally happened in the time span of about 3 weeks. In less than 1 month, my life completely changed. What my life looked like, what was happening, it was completely different in less than a month. And it's, like I said, we're taking a little trip back in time. It's been years since all of this took place, and I've since moved towns. I lived in another apartment. I bought my first home. But what's been so special about all of these places is I've been able to just make each one of them my own, but also I've made them into a sanctuary. And they've been these spaces where God's met with me, and I've been able to meet with him. And when I think back on that day, I don't know that packing that first box really changed anything on God's side of the equation. Like, maybe, I don't know, maybe he was always going to move me into that first apartment as quickly as he did. But one thing I can say for sure is it did something for me. Seeing that box on the floor in my bedroom reminded me of what was coming. And it reminded me to thank God in advance for what he was already orchestrating, even when I couldn't see it. I needed that visual representation of what I couldn't see yet. So going back to what I was talking about at the beginning of this episode about the idea of passive faith and active faith. Passive faith looks like, and like I said, this is my terminology, my working definitions here. But passive faith looks like placing something in God's hands and leaving it up to him. So in my example, with the story of my first apartment, that would look like God telling me about taking me into a season of transition and into, a new apartment, and me being like, all right, cool. you do you, God. Like, I trust you. You can do that. And just let me know when you're ready. And not really like doing anything beyond that. I just see it all as being in God's hands at that point. But in contrast, active faith looks like me trusting God to do that. So absolutely still doing like, all right, God, you got this. You said it, you'll do it. Trusting him in that sense, but then also packing my first box to show him that like, hey, I want to partner with you in this promise. What God's been showing me is he wants us to grow into maturity where we're actually partners with him. And it's moving beyond, there's a time and there's a place when we have that childlike faith. And, the Bible talks about like, you have to be like a child to enter the kingdom. And so there's absolutely that place of like total dependency of like, God, you do this thing. Like only you can do it. I'm trusting you with this because there are situations that are completely out of our control. And so absolutely that has a place. But also as we grow in our maturity, our spiritual maturity with the Lord, as we go on this journey, like I really do believe he's extending an invitation to us to not just be that, almost a little bit removed part of the process of like, all right, God, you're doing it, but actually being like, hey, I really can't make this happen. I couldn't make those apartments open up and offer me a place, but I could show that I was partnering with him by packing my first box. And so it's this place where we're not just saying we trust him with our words, but we're showing we trust him with both our words and our actions. So as I've shared about the story with my apartment, I can't help but wonder what promise you might be believing God for in this moment. Maybe you're like me and you're in a season of asking God for a place of your own too. Or maybe it's healing in your body, a husband, a family of your own, a degree, a job, restoration in a relationship. What I want to ask you today is, what's a first box that you could pack right now? And maybe it's not a literal packing of a box, right? Depending on what your promise is. It's not always that tangible, that physical, but what's something visual and tangible that can represent the thing that you're believing God for, and that will serve as that reminder to trust God's faithfulness for you tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day. And I know the story about me getting my apartment is a pretty neat, clean-cut kind of example. To pray and believe for something and get it within 3 weeks is not my norm. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, when he said, I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to do it fast, I was like, excuse me? God, is that you? Like, am I hearing you right? And, I'll just go out on a limb and say that's probably not the norm for you either, because that's generally not how God does things. There's definitely a lot of, planting the seed, time before it gets to the harvest. And I don't want to make the mistake of, turning this into, packing the first box is this formula that we can manipulate God with. And, once you pack your first box, like within this timeline, you're going to get what you wanted. That's not what this is at all. Because the truth is, like, I still have promises from God that I'm believing for, that I have been for years. And, even when I talked about in the first episode about getting my house, is like, oftentimes suddenlies are preceded by years of believing for something. And even with me getting my first apartment, like, yeah, it was a 3-week time span, but there were years of prayers of God, I want a place of my own. Can you give me a place of my own? And so there are still areas in my life that I'm believing God for. And to say they don't feel much closer than they did 10 years ago, in some ways isn't a complete exaggeration. I feel more prepared and better positioned for them than I did years ago. But if I'm not careful, it definitely can feel more and more hopeless if I let it as each year goes by. So once again, gotta reintroduce my friend Robin into the story. A couple of birthdays ago, she reminded me once again to prepare what I've been praying for, but this time in the area of a husband. So it was my 30th birthday. So went all out, got like my friends and I rented a condo and just had a blast. Like 10 out of 10 recommend renting a condo with your girlfriends to celebrate your birthday. So that birthday, she got me multiple gifts. And she, of course, told me, like, open it in this order. This one has to be last. And by the way, you're going to bawl when you open the last one. So I'm like, cool, gonna cry in front of everyone. This is awesome. And she was right. When I opened it, I instantly had tears in my eyes because it was one of those really beautiful willow tree figurines of a man and woman embracing. And as I inspected it closer, I was like, oh, this is a wedding cake topper. And I actually, if you're watching the video, let's see, it's behind me over here. She got me. And what's cool is she didn't even know that I like the willow tree collection. But she just felt led to give me that wedding cake topper that, will be on my cake at my wedding. Well, side note, I actually don't like cake. So I got to figure out what other kind of dessert I'm going to have. I did hear that Dairy Queen, I haven't fact checked this, but I heard that they do ice cream cake wedding cakes. And if so, they might have their next customer. Whenever I get engaged and have a wedding, I might be buying a Dairy Queen ice cream cake. But she encouraged me to take that figurine and put it somewhere in my apartment where I'd see it every day as a reminder that it was coming, first of all, and just to thank God for how he's working in this area, even when I can't see the physical evidence of it around me. So right now it's sitting in my office. Sometimes I move it around, put it in different places in the house. And she also got me a sign that I've put next to it that says, faith isn't believing God can, it's knowing he will. And I can't tell you how many times I've looked at that topper or held it and thanked God for what's coming and for how he's preparing us both for our marriage. And it reminds me that I'm not just praying for some idea or this intangible dream, but there's actually a living, breathing man out there attached to this promise of God. And one day I'll embrace the promises that I've been contending for. I'll see my husband. I'll hold my kids. I'll hear their laughter and their small feet pitter-pattering down the hallway, and all the fights, all the sibling fights. You cannot forget those throwdowns, at least in my childhood. But I think sometimes we can get to a place where we've been believing for a promise for so long that it really does almost become kind of that like intangible idea or that pipe dream in a sense. And we forget that one day it's actually going to be more than just that promise. Like it's going to be our reality, right? Like that's going to come into our life. So I don't know what it is, what promise you're contending for, what it is that God's, told you he has for you. But I encourage you to think of what action you can take today or this week that can act as a physical sign of faith for what you know he's doing in the spirit. That could look like making a vision board or printing off a placeholder diploma until you get your real one, or purchasing a single piece of decor for the home that you want to buy one day. Or maybe it's getting a small gift for a loved one that maybe you're not in relationship with right now, but you're believing for restoration in your relationship. These things act as beautiful reminders that God is faithful and working on our behalf, even when we can't see it. Hebrews 11:1 in the Passion Translation says, "Now faith brings our hopes into reality and becomes the foundation needed to acquire the things we long for. It's all the evidence required to prove what is still unseen." So how will you partner with God in an active type of faith this week? I'd love to hear what that looks like for you, what God's putting on your heart. So feel free to find me on the socials, Whitney McDermott, DM me or email me at thebeautyofbecomingpodcast@gmail.com. And I'd love to hear what God's put on your heart, what your, quote unquote, first box that you're packing, even though it's probably not going to be packing a box. It might be, but whatever that act of faith is for you, that's going to be that reminder. Maybe it's a wedding cake topper too. But let me know, because I would love to partner with you in faith through prayer for your promise, because I know how much that's meant to me to have friends and family that have done that. And so I would love to be that partner with you in prayer. So thank you so much, ladies, for listening to this episode, and I will see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Beauty of Becoming podcast. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, hit the like button, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and select the bell icon so you're notified whenever new content is posted.